We are going to talk about the concept of being bold, fast, and responsible with AI. As we talked about really throughout the last couple of days, establishing that layer of trust is critical both up front and throughout the AI lifecycle. And so what we're here to do today is not really talk so much about the what in terms of principles or frameworks, but more the how.
Before becoming fascinated with artificial intelligence. And at that time, I went back to school, was recruited by the Air Force Research Laboratory, and spent about 14 years there working across all sorts of information operations in applying artificial intelligence across many different areas. And one of the biggest projects that I worked on prior to leaving was looking at how different AI ML systems responded to data poisoning. So fast forward, I ended up moving down to the DC area. I was the Chief Technology Officer for the United States Marine Corps. I was a service level coordinator for artificial intelligence, and also, I led a lot of the 10-cap portfolio there. So I've quickly realized that a lot of the development I was doing in private sector could be better transitioned if I left and really started focusing on raising awareness on how insecure some of these AI ML systems really are. So Datalytica is a company I founded. I am the CEO. We are both a service-based company, and we develop some really unique products. On the service side, we consult with places like the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and the NSA. But on the product side, we have a capability, we call it Reveal. And what Reveal does is it black box reverse engineer AI systems. And not just to expose what that underlying learning mechanism is, but also we have developed out a repository, a knowledge repository of how AI and machine learning responds under interrogation. So we don't need your code base to be able to tell you how insecure your AI or ML is. We have our own techniques and our own knowledge base, and once we start interrogating those AI ML systems, we can apply some very strategic strategies to be able to manipulate the data and have it drift and break as much or as little as we want to break it. So pretty cool stuff, and we're still working, looking for some partnerships.
Share your thoughts on just, core principles approach for establishing trusted AI or responsible AI really at the onset of AI adoption and implementation at scale.
Sure. Thanks, Brian, and also thanks to the KPMG team to the opportunity to be here. Quick background, I've built and sold a few startups in the past. One of them was bought by IBM. Then I had a chance to run IBM Watson as the first general manager, so I took the Jeopardy game, got it to about a few $100 million in revenues over 3 years. Then I was teaching responsible AI at University of Texas, Austin, and Cambridge when ChatGPT got launched, so I decided to put on the jersey once again and realized that everyone's building this powerful nuclear cores, but no one's thinking of putting a dome on this. So created TrustWise, and the focus of TrustWise is essentially to build trust as a service, as a shared service across all AI systems. Much like you have security as a service, so now that you have these prompt-driven systems, how do I know that that prompt, which could be a threat vector now, going from inside out, how do I make sure it's safe? How do I make sure its behavior is aligned to regulations and my policies? And most importantly, how do I make sure it's cost and carbon efficient? So TrustWise focuses on optimizing AI workloads for those 3 dimensions of safety, steerability to regulations, and cost and carbon efficiency. And to the second part of your question, that's the essence of how I define trust. It's a combination of answering these 3 questions. Is the output safe? Is the behavior guidable and steerable of the AI to my personal company regulations or market regulations like an EU AI Act or a NIST? And then finally, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the cost of the LLMs and the cost of the carbon footprint, is it going to justify the workload? and the ROI that will get on it.
You know, when we think about this concept, and I know we use it quite a bit at KPMG, but we want to be bold, we want to move fast, but we want to be responsible. So we want the AI that's being deployed to be both ethical and responsible. You think that's doable?
Yeah, I think, I think it's an imperative. I think responsible AI is profitable AI, and without that, you're not going to get it. But there are a few things that need to change. One is, most of the time, responsible AI is thought of as the end thing. So it's like if you're building a car, you say, well, this is a car safe and responsible. You say, yeah, let me put a bumper on before it goes to the paint shop. Yeah. It needs to be designed all the way in the beginning. So I think understanding and optimizing your design, I believe AI is going to be designed like chips will be designed in Formula One cars. They will be done in a design tunnel before you even cut any code, because these are very complex systems. So designing trust and designing responsible AI right in the beginning is the first piece. Second is the metrics by which we measure these AI systems, I think, need to be flipped around. Yeah. Instead of looking at these systems as a data and a model problem, we have to look at it first as a trusted outcome problem. So we have to work at a trusted outcome in, rather than 8 billion parameter model with 26 gigabytes of data out. Yeah. So there are a couple of things that needs to, I think, flip in our approach before we can really start getting values for this.
So Michael, I might turn to you next and kind of continue on this on this side of the equation, but just establishing the trust and the balance. Really excited about all the work that we continue to do with ServiceNow, but particularly in the AI space. Thinking about all the work that you're doing at ServiceNow, thinking about all the work that other large techs are doing around bringing these large language models and these capabilities to market, what's the balance? How do enterprises, how can they think about establishing trust, leveraging some of the work that's been done, and really finding the balance on what do they revalidate, or how can they validate what's being delivered to them?
I think AI is such an omnipresent thing. So the approach that ServiceNow took was looking in the umbrella of what we do, which is digitizing business transformation. We look at the AI capabilities, Gen AI is only one of them, as it's an enabler to an outcome we're trying to drive. And we have to combine the element of enterprise trust together with the speed, right? Because even in ServiceNow, the product sets we represent are doubling every 60 to 90 days for the foreseeable future. So the only way to answer that question is the way Manoj was driving it, is you have to provide the instrumentation services and tools implicit in the design of the platform, so that the customer doesn't have to go through all this curation and putting everything together on their own. There will be areas where that's going to happen because an ISV won't build to a particular area and you'll have to build custom. But I think any customer looking at pervasive SaaS applications, they're all going to take that similar approach. So, we design trust from the inside in the platform itself, and the platform persists to every workflow that's stood up. So every workflow that's built on ServiceNow is inheriting this trust. It's presented in an AI dashboard or a control tower you can administer, you can actually observe. We've vectorized all the data in advance, and we manage that for the customer, so the customer doesn't have to do all that on their own. We've then built all that capability, and I think customers, I think these data foundation layers, especially in the enterprise, you have to be careful because you don't know what's going outside. And so we've provided an easy button for that that's also integrated into the workflow. So I think the more you can curate and deliver the car, and the way Manoj was talking about is, fit for purpose and designed by intent to provide the capability out of the box, the faster you can help customers move to trust and speed.
Josh, just pivoting, given kind of your role in serving customers as well in this space, but I know we've talked the last couple of days in terms of you're working with startups, you're working all the way up through some of the largest Fortune companies. Building on what both Michael and Manoj said, how can companies achieve scale, without compromising some of these things, right? And so there's a level, I know we talked about this, but there's a level of inherent trust that needs to be established, that needs to be built upon, and then there's also these validation layers that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, especially over the last 18 months with the startup community in the Fortune 500. Very different mindsets in adoption of this technology, and I think we'll get to that a little later. But I mean, ultimately, especially in the Fortune 500 right now, everybody wants to implement something along these lines, but there's a lot of, we keep harping on trust, and it really comes down to partnership and trust in the provider of that technology. And this is going to sound a little bit like a commercial for Google, but we have a long history of using artificial intelligence, and you are probably using a myriad of our products that have been using this artificial intelligence for quite some time. So we've got some history in how to maintain these systems at scale and how to keep your data private and secure. And we hope we've built a pretty strong, trusted relationship with our customers on the consumer side. And that's actually translating into a lot of our adoption on the B2B side within Google Cloud and with our technologies, is that, the first and foremost question is, where does my data going? Is my data secure? Is my data private? And we start there. It's usually the first question anybody has is, and again, we built constructs from day one to be able to allow that, because what I see on the flip side of, and this is no knock against startups, but especially last year, there was a lot of SaaS products that were rushed to market that were trying to be sold to the B2B. And a lot of my founder friends were like, Josh, how do I sell in the enterprise? I keep getting the stiff arm. And it's like, because you're telling them you're sending all their data to a shared API point. Yeah. And that's just a non-starter, right? And so that kicked off a lot of the conversations we have with the Fortune 500. The other portion of it is, and you talked about it a little bit, is huge concerns on IP and what data is constructed the knowledge of this model. Right. And that's something, again, that I learned very early on in this space years ago. Again, we've been working on this stuff for quite some time. And the first model I was working on and bringing it into production or third-party access was a code completion model. And at that time, I was very naive to the fact of IP leakage out of these models. And it was not a trivial process to go through trillions of tokens to look for IP and compliance rules because what might be presented by these models. And I think Google's a company, we took a little knocks for us, the speed we came to market on this, but we already knew the challenges with this. And you saw those ramifications very early on in the space last year where a lot of people leapfrogged that due diligence on the training data, and they're paying the price for it right now. So I think over time, our methodology of being very thorough and coming from an approach of we're already servicing billions of customers on the B2C side, and we'd rather take the time to do the due diligence so that our customers aren't in a situation where they're now liable for IP or what the models is producing is a big part of it.
And I think the protection of data and the, we're not training off of your data and just kind of overcoming some of those hurdles, which are kind of, like you said, the foundation of the trust and the relationship, I think are critical elements. I think as I come back around, Misty, I'm thinking about, just some of the comments that you made and even just some of our conversations around, really just thinking through the security aspects, privacy, and protecting data, et cetera. But what, in your opinion, what do effective guardrails look like? And, as we're thinking through some of these concepts, deep fakes or adversarial threats, what are things from in your mindset that companies can be thinking about and doing today to work towards effective guardrails?
One of the big things about AI and machine learning that I try to stress a lot is that not all artificial intelligence is created equal. Artificial intelligence fundamentally is a set of mathematical algorithms that can learn over time. Some of them are heavily dependent on historical knowledge base to seed them, and others are, sometimes doing active control, empowering robotics that senses the environment and tries to achieve some sort of an objective function. There's just a whole bunch of different AI, ML learning mechanisms that empower a lot of these different capabilities. And what I think is important for people to understand is that effective guardrails are going to look different for different AI, ML systems. And one of the things that we have shown is that when you interrogate these systems, they respond vastly different to all other factors equal to poisoning. And so that's important because for a given application, an AI system needs to be tested and red teamed, in my opinion, to be able to make sure that it's going to operate as intended in the environment in which you're going to place it. So another thing that we've discovered, we've integrated very quickly into our business operations within my organization the use of things like large language models, ChatGPT. We find that if our team doesn't use these tools regularly, they don't necessarily know what the limits and what those bounds are. So an example, deepfakes and some of these kind of hallucinations that you hear about. We had one situation where we were trying to align a candidate's resume to the position, right? And the ChatGPT that we were using, that we had created in-house, was trying to make it so that candidate was very well aligned. So it hallucinated some things that were in his resume that weren't there, which, we fixed it and everything. But I mean, think about this rolled out too early to like a military operation. We heard a lot about this earlier today, trying to get these tools in the hands of the military. And we have commander's intent, and we have the intelligence report. Is the large language model that operator is using going to want to adhere to commander's intent and hallucinate that there's something in the intelligence report that isn't there? That's a very real concern that we need to think about. So I think using it, test and evaluation, and red teaming is extremely important.
I do want to double click on the differences you're seeing between some of the large enterprise incumbents versus the startups.
Yeah.
Just as we kind of continue on this journey.
It's stark, and I like to work with both for different reasons. Enterprises are scale and startups are speed. And I think the biggest difference, especially last year, the crypto market kind of dried up right as generative AI took off. So there was a massive amount of funding going into the startup community last year for AI. Seed rounds of 10, 20, $50 million. I've never seen anything like it before. And so the biggest difference is when I'm working with a startup, they're willing to take huge risks for speed, right? So when I'm working with a startup, it's usually about functionality, build out, MVP as quick as possible, and then maybe we'll get maybe they have a legal team, maybe they don't, maybe they have some questions on data, but maybe they don't. Whereas the incumbents, the Fortune 500, is the exact opposite. They don't want to take any risk, if possible, in implementing this. So the questions start with legal, they start with data protection, all the things we've been talking about, like where is this data shared, is it private, where does it go? Like we don't even start a design phase until you get past the legal hurdles for it. And identification is a big one as well. Like if that's kind of a non-starter with the Fortune 500, if we're not going to identify them from the models we use, it doesn't even start. Whereas a startup, that I don't even think that's ever come up in the last year. Like they're not, again, different markets, and it makes sense on both sides. If I was a startup, I'd be going for speed as fast as possible too, and take much more risk versus an incumbent that, a security breach could be a huge hit to their reputation and to their overall value. So I definitely see the.
Go ahead, Michael.
ServiceNow only plays in the large enterprise segment, but to Josh's point, I think one thing we see the difference in speed in the enterprise is what's the intent of the project? Yeah. Because if the intent is actually to take 100 basis points of operating margin out, or if it's to drive the productivity or increase the customer sat of self-service, there's clear mandate and goal and precision around how to approach that. But oftentimes we run into customers who just kick in the tires. Yeah. Right? It's like, I have to do a Gen AI project because I have to do it.
Right.
And that's not going to be as effective because they will kick every tire you possibly can without an objective.
Yeah.
So that's the common pattern we're seeing, is trying to get the customer oriented to what problem are you trying to solve, and how can we help you do that at speed.
And that's been, that's been a large body of the base of work that we're doing kind of in the use case and enablement in the kind of technology design piece from a KPMG perspective with clients as well as, let's step back from the 150 use cases that we've brainstormed from the bottoms up, and let's think about what are we trying to solve for? What are the patterns? What are the behaviors?
Exactly.
How do we actually get the ROI that we're seeking? How good is good enough consideration? Because you may not have, I'll call it the problem fully solved, but you need to come to market because it's what the market needs today while you're developing what it needs tomorrow. Absent the speed side of being able to move more quickly. Any thoughts on that side of the equation?
I think one of the very important things that we are seeing is this is a new class of technology with a new set of behaviors. So things like hallucinations and all, a startup would look at it both as a feature and a bug. But a big enterprise will probably look at it as a bug first and not as feature. So to kind of build on what Josh and Michael said, one of the big difference I'm also seeing in enterprises and startup is where their focus is. So if you broadly look at AI around productivity, creativity, and innovation as the 3 buckets, enterprises are focusing more on process productivity. Startups are focusing more on creativity and business model innovation. And again, someone like ServiceNow is in a great position to be able to take that trusted position they have and provide not just productivity, but also innovation and creativity on top of it. With respect to this whole topic of trust, there is, I think, a realization in the startup community, because I also make investments, that the market will be piloting for the next 12 to 18 months. There's not a whole lot of stuff that's going to go into production. And as a result, the capacity to go in with good enough is good enough, and start really understanding what are the InfoSec and AppSec requirements to be able to, for example, I mean, we work with a large bank where Google Vertex and Google Model Garden's there, and TrustWise now was told you should be able to access any model from Google Vertex and optimize it without, so the process that we went through for 3 months just to get the InfoSec and AppSec. So startups are taking this 2-phase approach. One is, let's go in and come up with a problem that's unique enough and big enough. And then let's go through the crawl, on your knees and elbows to get into the InfoSec and AppSec to agree to this.
Right.
So I think there is another thing that companies can learn from this is maybe have a stability group and an agility group.
Right.
Where in your stability group, you have your big systems, and then you have this small area, like a gym,
Right.
where you try out these things, and then when they graduate, you bring them into the enterprise.
Yeah.
So I think there's a blend of both that some of the more progressive ones are beginning to do.